I had just come back from the hospital. My heart hadn't even settled yet, when my son stood in the middle of the living room and said one sentence that froze everything. "Dad, Mom, no need to prepare anymore. We got married last week." I thought I had heard him wrong. I had spent money, spent energy, spent what little peace I had left in my old age, for that wedding. And then I realized I wasn't invited, not because I was sick, but because I wasn't considered valuable enough to be there. If you're listening to this story right now, please subscribe to the channel, and let me know which country you're listening from in the comments. I truly want to know how this story is reaching you. And now, let me tell you what happened next. I stood still for a few seconds after he said that. Not because my heart hurt, but because I needed to be sure I was still standing in my own house and not somewhere else entirely. Rose stood beside me, still holding the bag of medicine from the hospital. She looked at me, then at Julian, as if she were waiting for someone to laugh and say this was just a poorly timed joke. But no one laughed. Julian avoided my eyes. He stared down at the wooden floor, the same floor I had laid plank by plank when he was still a little boy. Kimberly was different. She leaned against the kitchen counter, one hand scrolling on her phone, the other lightly tapping a brand new leather suitcase. The air in the house turned cold very fast, even though outside the caramel sun was shining just like it always did. I asked slowly and clearly where the ceremony had taken place. Not to accuse anyone, just out of habit. The habit of a father who always wants to understand before he speaks. Kimberly looked up, not exactly at me, but past me. "In Napa," she said. "A small resort, private, only people who were truly necessary." I nodded. In my mind, I saw a moment from 2 years earlier. Julian, sitting in this very chair, telling me he needed help. I transferred the money. Again and again. In total, $85,000. I didn't keep records, because I trusted my son. I even put down the deposit for the house they're living in now, because Julian said it would be their forever home. I asked again, my voice still steady, why we hadn't known anything. Julian opened his mouth, but Kimberly spoke first. "Dad just had surgery. He looks tired. He wouldn't look good on camera." She said it the way someone talks about the weather. I didn't want our big day to be affected. Rose squeezed my hand. I felt it clearly. She was shaking, but she didn't cry. In more than 40 years of marriage, I had rarely seen her like that. Not angry, just quietly pushed aside far too easily. I looked around the house. Gift boxes stacked against the wall. Watches, handbags, expensive bottles of wine. I recognized a few items I had paid for. Others were gifts from people I had never met. I asked Kimberly what they planned to do with all of it. "We're packing up," she said, "getting ready to move. This house is a bit old." This house. The house where Julian learned to walk. Where Rose stayed up all night when he had a high fever. Where I fixed every pipe, every door. Not because it was cheaper, but because I believed family was worth taking care of. Julian finally looked at me. He said everything had been handled properly. That a small wedding was the sensible choice. That Mom and Dad should rest and focus on recovery. He spoke smoothly, like a presentation he had rehearsed. I asked one last question. "Who paid for that wedding?" Julian stayed silent. Kimberly smiled. Not a victorious smile, but the smile of someone who believes the answer no longer matters. That's when I understood. They didn't hide it from us because they were afraid we'd be hurt. They hid it because they believed we no longer had a role in their new picture. I wasn't a father. I was an expense, already used up. I walked into the small study at the end of the hallway. Old shipyard drawings were still on the desk. I kept them even after I retired because that was a part of my life I never wanted to sell. Behind me, I heard Rose speaking softly to Julian. Her voice tried to stay calm. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard the apology. Not an apology because they were wrong, but because they had hurt her. That night, when Julian and Kimberly left with their suitcases, the house grew quiet again. Rose sat by the window. I made tea. We didn't talk much. There was no need. But in that silence, something changed. I stopped thinking about the wedding. I thought about the documents I had signed, the money I had transferred, and the things I never questioned because I believed family didn't come with conditions. I was wrong, and that was the first night I truly understood. If I don't protect myself, no one else will do it for me. After that quiet night, I woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling, as if the entire space around me had changed color. I looked at Rose. In her eyes, I saw both worry and caution. We had just been through my heart surgery. There was still a dull ache in my chest, but the real pain now didn't come from my body. It came from realizing I had been betrayed by my own family. Julian called around noon. His tone was polite, controlled, but I could hear calculation in every word. He asked me to sign a document, a property management authorization, he said, so I could rest after surgery. Before, I might have believed he was trying to protect me. Now, it was clear. This was an attempt to take control of the shipyard, the most important asset I still had. I looked at the papers on the table. The words seemed harmless on the surface, but underneath them was intent. A quiet anger began to rise inside me. I asked Julian, "What do you plan to do with the shipyard?" My voice was slow, but it carried a weight I knew he couldn't ignore. He went silent, then tried to reassure me. "It's just for convenience, Dad. Everything is still yours." But I didn't believe him anymore. I looked at Rose. She gave a small nod. We both understood. This time, I had to face the truth without hesitation. Then came the second truth. While scrolling online, Rose stumbled onto something by accident. Kimberly had live-streamed their secret wedding at a luxury resort. In the video, she told viewers that her parents had died in a tragic accident to gain sympathy. And sponsorships. It felt like a cold blade cut straight through me. Everything I had believed, every dollar I had given, all of it, reduced to a tool for image and display. That day, I didn't react impulsively. I focused on details, on evidence. I knew if I moved too fast, they would deny everything, erase the proof, and I would lose before I could even fight back. Rose and I began gathering records, bank statements, payment receipts, every video Kimberly had ever live-streamed. Each time I saw her face, lying calmly about her parents' deaths, a quiet but determined fury grew inside me. A few days later, Julian called again. Same tone, but colder. He promised everything would be fine if I just signed the papers. I stayed silent. I listened. I observed. Rose even reminded me quietly, "Don't react yet. We need proof." She was right. This was no longer just a family matter. This was a power game, and I had to play by their rules while finding a way to take control back. One evening, Julian and Kimberly came over to make peace. I put that in quotation marks, because I knew it was all for show. I invited them to sit in the living room. Kimberly was confident, smiling. She talked about the gifts, the ones I had paid for. Then casually, without hiding her pride, she said she had sold my antique watch collection, my grandfather's keepsakes, to buy the latest Hermes bag. I stayed quiet, took a sip of tea. My silence unsettled her a little. Julian, however, remained confident. In that moment, I felt a wave of focused anger rise. I understood something very clearly. If I wanted justice, I had to go further. I had to move quietly, but with certainty. I decided I would not sign anything, and I would not confront them directly. Not yet. Instead, Rose and I continued our plan, tracking every expense, every transaction, recording conversations. Day by day, the tension built. Julian and Kimberly had no idea that what they believed were clever moves were being carefully observed. They thought I was weak after surgery, easy to control. They didn't know that the anger of a man who has lived long enough, combined with patience, can become a quiet force that cannot be denied. I thought about all those nights fixing small details at the shipyard, all the times I taught Julian to work honestly, to be decent. I realized that without careful intervention, everything I built would be destroyed by greed and vanity. So I began planning, not just to protect my assets, but to reveal the truth, to show people who Julian and Kimberly really were, without losing my own dignity. That evening, as I watched Rose in the soft, fading light, I told myself, this time I will move slowly and surely. Each step will be a small turning point, a quiet revelation, no force, no drama, just enough to make those who underestimated me realize how wrong they were. That day ended with a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. I knew the battle hadn't yet reached the legal table, but it had already begun. In every observation, every recording, every piece of evidence, Rose and I collected. The betrayal called greed had opened a new chapter, one where I was no longer passive, but the one setting the rhythm of the game, slowly, steadily, and with resolve. After I decided not to sign the authorization papers, I began to realize something clearly. Julian and Kimberly didn't just look down on me. They were willing to use any tool necessary to get what they wanted. One morning, Rose received a call from the hospital. A nurse we didn't recognize asked detailed questions about my medical records. At first, we thought it was a mistake, but almost immediately, I felt it in my gut. They were trying to build false evidence, to claim I was no longer mentally sound after the surgery. I sat quietly listening to the voice on the other end. No anger, just cold awareness. I knew that if I reacted emotionally, they would deny everything, erase the trail. I asked Rose to record every call, save every message, every email from that nurse. Everything I did was silent, but deliberate. Strangely enough, monitoring every detail of this situation felt more intense than my heart recovery itself. We began reviewing everything. All bank statements, all receipts, every transfer I had made to Julian over the past 2 years. $85,000. The villa deposit, credit card payments, every dollar documented. Carefully, I wanted the truth ready, so that one day when it came into the light, no argument could hide it. One evening, I invited Julian and Kimberly over. I told them it was to make peace. I didn't say much. I just stood there and watched them walk into the living room. Kimberly arrived with confidence, phone in hand, smiling, as if performing for an invisible audience. Julian stayed composed, polite, careful. I simply observed, silent. During that staged dinner, Kimberly revealed something I hadn't expected. She spoke about my antique watch collection, my grandfather's keepsakes, the ones I had protected for decades. She said she sold them to buy a new Hermes bag. Her words rang inside me like a bell. Everything I had trusted them with, reduced to fuel for vanity. I said nothing. I let the silence work. Julian stiffened slightly, uncomfortable, but Kimberly stayed smug, unaware she had just exposed a serious mistake. That was the breaking point. Betrayal was no longer a quiet presence. It was clear. In every word, every gesture, Rose and I recorded everything. Every sentence, every movement, each video, each bank record, each message became a critical piece of the picture I would reveal later. In the days that followed, Rose and I kept our routine. We walked by the coast. I breathed in the salty caramel air. But in my mind, a plan was taking shape, step by step. I didn't act on emotion. I acted on logic, on evidence. Every move was measured, because Julian and Kimberly believed I was weak, that I couldn't fight back. That belief was my advantage. One afternoon, Kimberly accidentally left her phone on the table. On the screen, an old live stream. Her voice, lying about her parents' deaths to gain sympathy. Slowly, I recorded the entire screen. From that moment on, everything had proof. I organized it all into a file. Money trails, deception, attempts to manipulate witnesses, enough to show their plan was calculated, and enough to expose the truth. Rose sat beside me. Sometimes she looked at me quietly. I could see it in her eyes. Worry and trust. Her presence became a steady strength, helping me move slowly, but firmly. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I didn't show hatred. Every action was designed to apply pressure, while keeping my dignity intact. One day, when Julian and Kimberly came by to clear up misunderstandings, I laid everything out on the table. Not the evidence, just the silence. I listened. I watched. When Kimberly began bragging about what she had bought with my money, I said nothing, but my silence spoke clearly. I was ready. I knew everything, and I would reveal it when the time was right. That night, Rose and I sat by the window, looking out at the sea. The house was quiet, but my mind was tight with focus. I knew this wasn't over. It had entered its most critical phase, a silent battle, where every piece of evidence, every word, every move would decide the outcome. Julian and Kimberly believed they were in control. They didn't know I had learned how to move slowly, to observe carefully, and to wait. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. My heart still ached softly, but my clarity was stronger than any physical pain. The betrayal called greed had become a trial. But it also gave me a chance to prove something important, that with patience, with evidence, and with preparation, justice always finds its way out. And this was the quiet climax. A battle without noise, without force, yet strong enough to remind those who underestimated me. When truth stands up, lies never win forever. I knew the moment would come, and when it did, everything built on deception would collapse right in front of them. The day I decided to confront Julian and Kimberly at the lawyer's office, I woke up with a strange feeling. My heart no longer throbbed with pain. The anger had settled into something else. A cold, steady focus. Every detail, every step, carefully weighed. Rose stood beside me, holding my hand in silence. She knew today was a turning point. There would be no going back. We walked into the office of Sterling, my old friend, a lawyer I trusted not just legally but morally. Sterling looked at me and we understood each other without words. Today wasn't about drama. It was about truth and dignity. Julian and Kimberly were already there, confident, prepared. They brought fake medical records and the authorization paper they had tried so hard to force me to sign. Julian smiled, the same smile I used to see at family celebrations. Now it looked cold, calculated. Kimberly stood behind him, phone in hand, ready to record, ready to live stream if needed. Julian spoke first, smooth as ever. "Dad, everything is perfectly arranged. We're just trying to protect your interests and keep things running smoothly." Sterling stayed silent. I slowly placed my hand on their folder and began turning the pages. Fake details, incorrect signatures, medical information exaggerated beyond reason, carefully prepared, but they didn't know I already knew everything. I took a long breath. Then I spoke, slowly. "I've reviewed your documents. They're all inaccurate. I am not mentally impaired. The shipyard is still my property. And neither of you, Julian Kimberly, has any authority to decide anything without my consent." Julian froze. I saw it in his eyes, confidence shifting into confusion. Kimberly frowned, trying to stay composed. I reached into my jacket and slowly pulled out a recorder. Every conversation, every lie, every dishonest agreement. I played a recording. Kimberly's voice from her live stream, lying about her parents' deaths, words she believed only strangers online would hear. Now, they filled the room. Silence followed. Julian tried to interrupt, but I was ready. I continued calm and steady. "I've also reviewed every financial transaction. The $85,000 I spent over the past 2 years was not a license to control me. Every transfer is documented. I no longer trust promises or performances of devotion." Kimberly's hands began to shake. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by unease. Julian tried to recover, but the questions I asked, and the evidence laid out, created pressure they couldn't escape. Then I said it clearly. "The house you're living in, my name is still on the deed. I have the legal right to evict you immediately, and I will unless every false claim and document is withdrawn." That was the twist I had been preparing for all along. No yelling, no threats, no raised voice. Just evidence, piece by piece, placed calmly on the table. My eyes stayed cold, my voice steady, as if I were telling a story already finished. A story about truth and betrayal. Julian looked at me, unable to speak. Kimberly tried scrolling through her phone, but it was too late. I had copies of every live stream. Her influencer career now stood on the edge, one email away from collapsing if those videos reached her sponsors. I didn't need to say it. They understood. I continued softly. "Any power you think you have is built on lies, and lies don't survive long in the light of truth. I waited for this moment to prove something. Justice is not reserved for those who know how to deceive." Rose squeezed my hand. Her presence gave me strength. We didn't need to attack. We didn't need to escalate. We let the truth speak for itself. And that was what finally broke their control. The meeting ended. I held my gaze. I didn't soften. I knew the next steps were clear. Eviction, restoring ownership, legal safeguards so this could never happen again. But more importantly, I had proven something to myself. Quiet anger, when guided by patience, can become a powerful force, strong enough to expose lies without violence, without chaos. As we left, I looked at Julian and Kimberly. No confident smiles. No cold composure. Only silence. And the weight of consequences. I walked out with Rose. It felt like a burden had been lifted, though the work wasn't finished. Tomorrow, I would reorganize everything. Assets, trusts, and finally, freedom. On the drive home, I looked at the wide California ocean. The waves moved steadily, not loud, not aggressive, but unstoppable. And I understood something clearly. This quiet battle was complete. And it was enough. Dignity, justice, truth, they endure. Even when greed and deception try to drown them out. And I, through clarity, patience, and evidence, had reclaimed not just my assets, but my self-respect. After the meeting with the lawyer, as I stepped out of the office, a feeling of relief mixed with resolve washed over me. I looked at Rose beside me. She smiled softly, not a smile of victory, but the kind that comes from standing firm together in the face of betrayal. I knew then. What mattered most wasn't revenge. It was making sure Julian and Kimberly no longer had the power to manipulate our lives. When we got home, I took the next step. I reorganized everything, all assets, all documents, and I established a trust. Every contract, every bank account, everything was placed under clear conditions. Julian would receive only a modest monthly allowance, and only if he could prove he was supporting himself through honest work. I didn't want to destroy them, but I could no longer allow deception to continue. Justice had to be protected, humanely and with structure. Rose stood beside me as we sorted through old documents and keepsakes. Together we looked at things that were once sources of pride, now serving as proof of the truth. A sense of calm spread through me, as if everything had finally returned to where it belonged. The gifts, the paperwork, the shipyard mementos, all of it. Secure. Untouchable. We decided to sell the old house, not because it lacked meaning, but because it held too many memories tied to betrayal. Instead, we bought a small sailboat, a dream Rose and I had postponed for 30 years, always putting our children first. Now we could begin our own journey, free, peaceful, unburdened by schemes or lies. On our first day aboard the boat, I stood at the bow, the sea wind against my face. Rose stood beside me, holding my hand. For the first time in weeks, we laughed. A real laugh. No masks, no worry. I looked out at the open ocean and understood something clearly. Freedom and peace can't be bought with money. They come from the decision to protect dignity and stand by the truth. As for Julian and Kimberly, they were forced to face reality. I heard they were standing in line for work at a supermarket, an ordinary job, one that requires effort and honesty. I didn't feel satisfaction, only acceptance. Life has a way of holding people accountable for the paths they choose. This time, they were no exception. Rose and I spent the following days planning our journey along the California coast. Each morning, we watched the sunrise, listened to the waves, talked about dreams we had set aside for our children. I realized something then. We had spent our lives building a future for Julian. But when you forget yourself, everything you build turns into a burden. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, I imagined speaking directly to those listening, and I said, I spent my life trying to give my son a better future. But without character, wealth becomes poison. Respect and gratitude aren't built by giving more. They're built through fairness, decency, and honesty. Rose smiled at me, and in that smile was all the comfort and strength I needed. We had survived betrayal. We had survived being used, and we found real peace, not in money, not in power, but in living truthfully and protecting what truly matters. The final image is simple. Rose and me on the boat, waves rising and falling, the sunset lighting the faces of two people who have lived through enough. Julian and Kimberly far behind, figures learning hard lessons about gratitude and dignity. There is no hatred left, only freedom and quiet joy. I hold Rose's hand, take a deep breath, and I know this is the life we deserve. Peaceful, free, whole. We learned an important lesson. Love and financial support can never replace character. Money can build things, but only respect and gratitude build something that lasts. And so Rose and I begin a new journey. No debts, no chains, just the open ocean and the freedom we waited a lifetime for. If my story inspired you or helped you reflect on gratitude and character, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future family drama stories. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brought you something meaningful. Your support is what keeps these stories alive.